subject today is the film Kerala Story, which, as you've no doubt seen, has opened Pandora's box. And so it's necessary to describe some of the important aspects of what sensitive areas this film has touched upon. I'll take them one at a time. But the first is always context. Everything happens in a context. We need to discuss that. So the first thing we're going to be talking about tonight is three religions, that of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then what is not a religion but a dharma, the Hindu Vedic Sanatana Dharma culture, which is obviously the place where the Kerala moment has been happening and is coming from. And so we need to ask, what is the background story? There's always a backstory. The front story isn't what it appears to be, and the backstory gets us started where we should. So let's be very clear on two things, actually three, because Judaism is the first to be mentioned. Throughout its history, Judaism has not been known as a violent religion. In fact, the only way you can join, especially if you're a man, is to have a rather delicate and unusual operation that changes parts of your body, because that's a prerequisite for a man to be converted to Judaism. You have to be circumcised. So you could say that, no pun intended, Judaism is a very private religion. It's kept to itself throughout history. It hasn't been violent. It hasn't been aggressive. It hasn't inflicted itself upon other people, nor has it tried to convert others. And that is quite ironic, considering it's the root of what are called the Abrahamic religions, that all emerged, according to their teachings, from Abraham and Sarah. Now, I'll just tell you one interesting thing before we go further. But since those words are in the context of Sanskrit, doesn't Abraham and Sarah sound a lot like a mispronunciation of Brahma and Saraswati? Just a thought. We'll come back to it. But for the moment, we didn't see the violent invasion process with Judaism. If anything, it has pulled away and gone underground and gone private. And it really didn't get much airtime until World War II, obviously, where they were treated with the kind of violence that we've seen in the other two religions. They were treated very badly. They were rounded up as animals. And this brings us to Christianity. Now, once again, whenever I speak of a religion, I always start by saying there are many truths in it that are valuable and immortal. It's not all one thing or another, but that doesn't excuse its historical record. So you would not think that any nowadays Christians behave like Christians once did, nor would you think that of Muslims necessarily. So let's put it this way. There are different kinds of people calling themselves Christians, and each of the leaders of those traditions had a different agenda. The one we know is the most dangerous amongst them officially is Islam. That's because jihad and forcible conversion has almost been a calling card for Islam. But of course, if you've ever traveled a bit, you know they're very sweet and sincere Muslims who would never dream of behaving that way. But somehow, Islam has condoned some very violent, very despicable practices. Beheading, all kinds of violence in various ways I won't go into because I'm not here to pick on them particularly or to dig all of that up. But the point is, as Carol, the film shows, it hasn't all gone away. It has still got pockets, that tradition, of extremely devious, extremely violent persons who don't treat the feminine very nicely. I have to say that. After all, they're enslaved, they're mutilated, they're treated badly in a myriad of ways that you would never even consider in the Vedic Dharma. Nor would you ever even think of it in Judaism. Did you know that Judaism is actually got a feminine divine? On the Shabbat, on Friday night, in Judaic homes, the female of the house lights the menorah, the candles that officially state that the Sabbath has arrived. And she does so on behalf of something called the Shekinah. The Shekinah, doesn't that sound a lot like the Sanskrit Shakti? Remember, all these languages come from Sanskrit originally. So the Shakti descends upon the house through the female of the house who lights the menorah, officially beginning the sacred day at which everyone renews their vows, renews their sensibility of who they are in Judaism. So you could see they're positioned somewhere between the Veda and not. But what they are not is dangerous. Back in the 60s, when I went into ashram and became a member of the Vedic civilization, there was a saying in universities, and everyone knew, that there were two kinds of Jews. Actually, three, because there was a Jew. Then there was a Boo Jew who added the Buddhist Dharma to Judaism. And then there was a Hindu. And they said, you know, I like what I was given, but I didn't get enough of it, and the Vedic culture fulfills me. And of course, Buddha was a yogi from the Vedic culture and a sort of guru. He took them as far as Nirvana. So if you looked in the ashrams in the 60s and 70s, in America, in Europe, in all the places where yoga went, you would find a healthy amount of Judaic sons and daughters who were jumping across into the Veda without really thinking that their parents would be angry with it. In fact, I had many, many friends who were Jewish, and they would go home and their parents would say, oy vey, how you doing? Everything fine? You good? They would say, yes, but I've actually become, you could say, oy veda, I've become a Hindu Jew, a Hindu. And the parents would go, do you take drugs? They'd say, no. They'd say, are you living a moral life? They'd say, yes, completely. Say, all right, well, it's great to see you. They would not get angry, they would not get upset, they would not force them back. They would allure them back with their love and parenting and so forth. So this I know firsthand and close up with large Jewish communities in the place in Detroit, Michigan, where I grew up. And so the mingling of Judaism and Christianity in the North American area, no problems. We all got along great. I was born Christian, Protestant. I like to call it plain vanilla. Not too distinguished, but not quite Unitarian, but enough that I got all the messages. But for my taste, they didn't teach me enough knowledge. What we would say in Sanskrit, Vidya. Now this is where we're going in the conversation. If it seems like I'm coming in from outside, it's to set a context for these religious traditions. Now, in the time of colonization, Christianity went off the rails. They just couldn't resist taking and stealing from wherever they went in the world. and the Pope did a papal bull, a couple of them, giving them permission to do so, saying if they're not Christian, then you can take anything from them, enslave them, dominate them. Their land doesn't belong to them. I've done other films describing this. But just so you remember that Christianity was, in certain historical moments, a very bad player, and a percentage still are, using money to manipulate and try to convert and domineering in a variety of ways that they shouldn't. But you don't see the kind of rape and pillage Christianity that used to exist. They've, most of them, gotten their manners back at least, and don't behave that way. So you don't see much rape coming out of the Christian community, or that kind of intimidation of the females for that matter. Though you will notice that although there was Adam and Eve, you know, Atom and Eve is from the Sanskrit. Atma and Jiva, we're called Jiva Atma. Isn't it amazing that the Sanskrit is just sitting behind the words of the major religious traditions of the world? And it is. And that's been overlooked, and that's where I'm going next. So, Islam is dangerous among the three nowadays. But what's happening in Bharat, in the country called India, is a recovery from colonization, from the purposeful exploitation and violence that was enacted against them. And of course, that always was going on in varying degrees between Islam and the Vedic tradition. So there's no question in the contest that on a day-to-day basis, Islam is the most dangerous and inclined to use violence of the religions. That is not built into Christianity, so after colonization, it more or less went away. And kind and gentle Jesus is what they talk about in the churches. And they don't treat women badly, though it's important to say, until just recently. Christianity was a male deity only. That is the Abrahamic. But Sarah was left out. So this brings us to our real deep question. What can the Hindu community do to remedy two things? The aftermath of the colonization by the British especially, by Christians and British colonizers, in the name at least of religion. So it's absolutely necessary that your children be instructed in how to reclaim their culture in a step-by-step process. Now, the other thing to know is that during colonization, English was implanted in India and became the dominant language. And by the time independence came, it was not convenient to make any other regional language the country's language culture-wide. So you see, in a sense, the colonizers are still there because India educates in English. Now, the next step in this is, there's two things. That the Vedic civilization and culture is a library, not a book. And this is difficult for the rest of the world because it requires patience, desire, a high degree of literacy, and an inclination to overlook the propaganda that has come from the religions and from science. So there's much to overlook to get to a point where you reintroduce a program of understanding Sanskrit vocabulary, and the Veda for your children, so that every child who graduates from junior high even, to speak of high school, will have a root, who comes from a Vedic family, will have a root in the Vedic literature, will have a root in the culture, so that they know that for sure as they go out into the world, and this is what we saw in the Kerala film, is Hindu ladies young ladies who did not know their culture, were susceptible to being drawn out of it because they really weren't in it in the most substantial way. So this is the next step in my explanation. There are two texts in the Veda that should be used as the user's manuals for all Hindu children. You could see the first one because it's gone around the world and hundreds of millions of people from every culture are practicing it, and that is Ashtanga Yoga. This particular volume, The Heart of Yoga, is by T.K.V. Desikachar and is one of the best Yoga Sutra manuals that I know of. There'll be more soon as Colonizing English is removed from the text of Yoga Sutras. Ashtanga Yoga is about the platform of our existence here within matter. So therefore, as we go through our childhood, we should have expert yoga training at different levels and according to our karmas and abilities and body type, so many things. And that's the platform that gets us ready to be adult and balanced in our physical embodiment. The next part is who we see ourselves as, what we are, who we are, what we do, what is our purpose for being here, how do we respond to it, what can we do, and what can we do to be the most we could be. The text for this, the yoga manual for that, the user's manual for your children is the Bhagavad Gita. To give you an example, part of education is learning right from wrong. But even right from wrong doesn't describe the gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. This includes the scientific concept of entropy, the fact that there are things we have to do to stay sattvic and balanced, but also it informs us about the dangers of those who are tamasic and hurtful and harmful. And with Islam's reputation, children coming out of high school should know this enough from the study of the Gita and many other things. They should know who they are as a Jiva Atma. They should know who Bhagavan is as the ultimate supreme, who Paramatma is inhabiting them, what the gunas are and how matter is interacting, what body types are and what that means. And they should also understand through the Bhagavad Gita that they have an identity that others will attack. And those words in Sanskrit are deva and asura. The behavior of those who harm young girls, women, anyone in a predatory fashion is asuric. This is where the concept of evil, this is the dark side. And the Bhagavad Gita makes it very clear that we're living in the midst of a battle of Kurukshetra. That's why it was given in the midst of one. So our world and the battle of our world would show up to us like that, and we would know how to see the dangerous characters, the ones that might not be trustworthy. And if there's anything that we have when we're young, it's naivete and optimism. So the Bhagavad Gita will not take away either of those, not the optimism, but the naivete will now be the symptoms of who to be careful with, who to see as dangerous, and knowing the wisdom to know to not respond, not be in those circles, to go away from that as soon as possible. The decisiveness of the Bhagavad Gita is that it was in a very dangerous situation, and so are our children, and so is the entire world. So the Bhagavad Gita is the user's manual for human beings living on Mata Bhumi, planet Earth, so that we know how to be here without being degraded, damaged, destroyed by the process or by any confused persons. So with that, this is the recommendation of the user's manual. Know who you're talking to, know their guna, know if they're dharmic, and avoid them if they're not.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.